pričam? Pa ne znam, brate, pričam puno jezika. Ja bor i Danmark.
Jaha,
Ja, så snackar jag dansk.
okej.
Ja,
Parli italiano?
certo.
Nej.
Ne, jesam mi govorim по-русски.
Jag govorim по-русски тоже.
Boom! Welcome back to the channel, my friends. We have a guest today. The very first guest on Golorimi Languages, Stefan. Welcome, man.
Hey, how's it going, guys? I've done videos with Will before, but first time being on Golorimi Languages, so
I know.
that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's crazy because normally we don't have guys in-house. We've done a bunch of those stupid Zoom video, whatever. This is going to be a little bit of a different format for us today here, guys. I'm looking down at our notes here because we're going to tell you how to learn any language fast because Stefan, you know what, I'm going to let him say his little language story. Go ahead, tell people what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm born and raised in the US, so obviously English is my native language, but a few years ago I moved to Sweden and really was inspired to learn a language. And Sweden's a country where everyone speaks such great English here. People are really surprised when you can speak Swedish as somebody that comes from an English-speaking country first, but that's always been sort of my goal and my commitment to really learn a language. And when you move to another country, it opens up so many doors that you can't even imagine when you can speak the native language. And I never wanted to feel like an outsider in the country where I was living, so that was really, really important to me. And now that I've got Swedish down solid. Ska vi börja?
Ska vi börja?
Ja.
Yeah.
Så nu har du varit i Sverige i 3 månader.
Yeah.
At a fluent level. I'm taking an interest in more languages as well, so not quite at the level of Will here that's got a lot of languages in his arsenal, but you know, slowly making some inroads into learning Spanish and some Romance languages, which is a completely other side of the spectrum versus the Scandinavian.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing a lot of people do is they download an app on their phone. For me,
Yes.
it was Duolingo, and I had basically taken Duolingo like super seriously when I was back in the US, because first I was like, I'm dating a Swedish girl, I'll spend like, do some lessons here and there, learn some basics, and then I got a job offer in Sweden, and I'm like, wow, I'm actually gonna move to this country, I'm gonna be living here, I really have a reason to learn the language. And so then I like really put in like 3-4 hours every day for like a couple months before moving to Sweden.
Damn, of just Duolingo?
Just Duolingo.
Wow.
And what was really good about that is it gave me like the basic foundation and the basic vocabulary. I wasn't able to really speak, but I had enough words in Swedish in my arsenal that I could communicate like basics of like, I want water, or like, and I was always really good at like focusing on like useful things, like how do I say I want, how do I say I need.
That's huge,
things
though.
that are like important, not like the turtle jumped over the rock.
Exactly.
It's like, I've never said turtle in the 5 years that I've lived here, but that's one of the first things you learn when you take the Swedish course. There's sort of a crazy stat where if you learn like the most important 100 or like the most used 100 words in a language, you can communicate like, I don't know the exact stats, maybe we can find them, but like 80% of the language. Once you can speak like the most commonly used 1,000 words of a language, you can, I think it's like over 95% that you can actually communicate. So like really focusing and like separating out in your head, like what are the most important, like most common words. If you learn those words really quickly and get it under your belt, you're well on your way.
And there's this weird thing that you have to be on the very edge of it being too hard and just enough. And that's hard for people to understand because you really don't know where that is. You need to be in conversations that are a little bit out of your zone, so you have to pay attention, like really, but you don't want it to be the news, you know, where they're talking about whatever, something in politics that you can't follow any of these long words, right? And so how did you do listening and comprehension practice?
For me, I would say where I made my most gains learning Swedish is I was working as a school teacher and I had really young students, so kids that were 9 or 10 years old. They just finished the 3rd grade. I had them in like my 4th, 5th grade classes, you know? And even though it was an English school, I mean, they just came from elementary school where they had very, very, very basic English. So to actually communicate with a 4th grader, you had to have or use the limited language capabilities that you had. So every single day for 6 months, I was communicating in Swedish, very broken, very terrible Swedish, but it was an easier way to communicate with those people than English because oftentimes they wouldn't understand it. So being in that situation where I was forced to use it forced me to learn the language versus if I had a normal job in marketing at an office with all adults that all spoke fluent English, I wouldn't have been forced in that situation. And I think that's why it's so hard for people to learn Swedish, because all the adults speak such great English versus you go to many countries in the world that don't speak English, people just learn the language because they have to.
Exactly.
And if you don't have that necessity, so I would say the biggest tip here is like, if you want to learn a language fast, immerse yourself in it. Put yourself in a situation where you're forced to use it And then what little you know is going to be better than not communicating at all. And it's going to naturally start to grow from there.
There's this weird thing because people have to understand that learning language is no different than anything else that you really want to do in life, because you have to be in that weird comfort, get out of your comfort zone in that little area. And just to touch on what you say about immersing yourself, this is the key. It can be done without moving. I've done it before. I've spent, at current rate, 7 days in Italy.
Yeah.
I speak Italian, no problem, right? So I've immersed myself by going there and living there. And so now the thing is, that's true. I have cultural blocks. That's what you miss. I don't understand certain things that.
Interesting.
You see what I'm saying? Where they'll talk about something that happens constantly in Italy. I don't understand these things, but I can speak. So it's a weird position to be in, admittedly, But when I moved to Denmark to play, we had a bunch of foreigners. All of them needed to learn English, and the director was like, "Why do you want to learn Danish? We speak English." And I'm like, "What? Of course I want to learn Danish. I want to learn all this stuff, But so if we're gonna put a recap on all these things before we ask one question, I want to ask you, the very first thing you would say to do is immerse yourself, but listen to something that you can understand, right? Find high frequency words.
Yeah.
And get into conversations before you're ready.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's about it.
Yeah, what's impressive to me about your language learning journeys is that you've been able to learn languages without spending a lot of time in those places. Because for me, that's very difficult. I've been able to pick up languages when I've been able to go to those places and actually be surrounded by it. Like I was in Spain for 3 months this winter, and I studied Spanish for like 6 to 12 months on Duolingo and trying to read basic children's books and all these things in Spanish. And all that time has nothing in comparison to just being there for 3 months. And now I can have basic Spanish conversations with people, which I couldn't do before those 3 months. So the fact that you're able to, even when you're not immersed, still find ways to immerse yourself, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think, and what it comes down to is that foundation. It's the foundation you're setting with deciding to do it Duolingo, because I wouldn't do, I've done Duolingo, plenty. Yeah. I kick out all apps. They're all gone now. Yeah. It all is based around listening and reading and then deciding. I don't have lessons with tutors if I'm gonna do that until later on.
Yeah.
I actually don't. I don't do speaking practice right at the beginning because it's just not that necessary. You need to absorb a ton, just like you did in your mother tongue. How much did your parents talk to you in English before you even said your first word? I mean, you had 2 years before you were really saying something like, "I want that," know? And so that same process you can hyper focus on. And that's what I think allows me to do that, because once I'm just gonna absorb, just be the sponge. Don't care, then boom.
So a lot of books, a lot of movies, a lot of everything in that language.
Yeah.
And then once you've absorbed this vocabulary, then it's time to
It'll
put
come
it in
out.
action.
It'll come out. The weird thing is it will come out without you even knowing. Yeah. But you have to absorb tons, because you need to get words from different angles. I watched this movie, I saw them talk about the kitchen here. I saw a cooking show, he talked about the kitchen here. My friend said he wants to go to the restaurant called The Kitchen. And now you've got these weird connections, and then it just comes out. And that's the weird thing,
When you first watch movies and TV shows in another language, do you have English subtitles or subtitles in another language?
If you're lucky enough, depends on the language, because depending on the language you're learning, there's not going to be a lot of materials, right? Okay. You're learning Croatian, good luck with you trying to find a massive amount of series that are available with English subtitles. It's not there. But if you're learning something like Chinese, Spanish, all this stuff, then yes, at the very beginning, absolutely. You need to have the subtitles there so you can get the context. But what's even better is to watch something that you've already watched in your native tongue.
Yeah.
That's the key right there. I have series and books and things that I've read millions of times. I know everything that's possible. So you could give it to me in Turkish, which I speak 0.1%, and I could kind of pick out what's going on here. I see that word. Oh, I know he's in this scene. That's what's going to do it.
Interesting.
That's better than the subtitles.
And then you're not stressed that you're missing out on some content, because you've already seen it.
You've already seen it. Already know it.
One thing I'm doing now, I'm rereading books in Spanish that I've read, but it's also been such a long time since I read them in English. I'm like, dang, I really actually do want to understand what's happening here.
Yeah. So if you had to do all of this again, and you will learn another language other than Spanish, I'm guessing, in your lifetime, especially considering what you've done now. You're in a nice position. What are you going to do differently in the future?
In the future, I'm probably going to focus less on the apps, like what you're saying, and I've sort of transitioned away from using Duolingo with Spanish and really just focusing on reading, absorbing the materials like that as much as possible. One thing I'm doing now with Spanish that I didn't do really with Swedish because I lived in Sweden, I didn't have to do it, but now I've got a conversation partner.
There you go.
Since I'm not in Spain, it's nice to have somebody that at least once a week, maybe even more. If I had more time for it, I would love to commit to more time and see that improvement more quickly. But basically, I meet once a week with a girl who's Spanish who moved to Sweden. So we speak Swedish for a half an hour, and then we speak Spanish for a half an hour.
Nice.
And just having those conversations, it's really good to like put into action and not be afraid to make mistakes.
Exactly.
For her, it's like when I'm talking to my boyfriend's family, it's like I'm afraid to speak Swedish because I don't want it to come off wrong. And she's like, when I'm talking to you, I'm just not stressed because I know you're going to speak really bad Spanish in the next half hour.
Totally.
So don't be afraid to make those mistakes. Totally. And that's what I think
that's perfect. Guys, if you want to see, obviously, Stefan and I both speaking in Swedish and Danish one, and then in Swedish, and my whole journey with Swedish and stuff like that, you can check that out on Stefan's channel. We will link to all that stuff, of course, and then I think we're gonna do another video. So make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you guys later. Peace.
See ya.